Hello everyone, welcome to Step 1, Part 2, where we will be conducting an assessment of micro features of our site or mapping our microclimates. This video is a little bit long, so stick with me. You can just get a list of everything you need to find in the little template that I've included below, but I figure, may as well give you a decent guide of what it actually looks like to do all these parts. So first you need to create a base map, just a clean representation of your site. You can make this in any manner that you'd like. For example, I'm using a screenshot of this house that I'm in from Google Maps. That's the property I'm assessing right there in the center. So first things first, we break this image up into the individual pieces that we might farm. For this example, I'm going to ignore that strip along the strip of earth along the southeastern border. It's shared with my neighbor, and I think it's just going to be too much trouble to change. It's just easy to leave that all grass, and we'll just mow it all as one continuous piece. Simple. Otherwise, we've got 4 triangles. So we see them outlined here, and then if we drop the satellite image away for a minute, we can do some calculations. So first we'll need to just number them to make things easier so we know what we're referencing. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then reorient them to a familiar direction so that it makes the geometry easier. So we start simple, right? Measure all the base, the height, multiply together, divide by 2, get all their areas individually, sum them together, and I see that I've got about 1,100 square feet of potential growing space. So all right, we're referencing our whole site here once again. Now we know how big all these areas are, and that will help us later when we start determining our planting density. So with all that math behind us, we'll finally start applying some forces to this site, right? We kind of like we addressed some of the external forces beforehand in the macro assessment. This is micro assessment. We're just looking at what happens in those particular instances. So I've got this whole site map here where I can look at how the wind roses that we investigated in the previous video might affect this site. You see, the wind can put incredible strain on plants by making them expend a tremendous amount of energy simply striving to remain upright, right? Just resisting the wind and standing. So we're trying to relieve this metabolic strain. Also, unless the air is laden with water vapor, then succulent plant material is vulnerable to desiccation. So this means that they can dry out, right? The stomata, the pores in the leaves are subject to water loss to the air, much like you or I. If we're breathing, dry desert air, it would dry us out. So these were the 3 major winds crossing my site, and then depending upon the different season, like I've got when they come in at different times of the year. Now we look along these paths that these arrows are taking. Are there any structures which might block this prevailing wind? Are there any gaps in any otherwise intact border which would result in an accelerated concentration of wind, like almost like a wind tunnel through a particular area? For my example here, a fence protects the western edge. The southeastern edge is abandoned to the turf grass, so the house blocks most of this wind for the sites in question because they're on the far side, the leeward side of the house. It seems in this instance my most threatening wind is the one that comes from the south, and then referring back to my notes from my macro assessment, that is the cold wind of winter. So these are all good things to know when I'm planning which crops to place where and when, and what protection they might need, and what temperatures they need to face, how resilient they need to be. So everything so far has been built within presentation software, but I am a fan of mixed media, multimedia, and multiple maps. So I'll show you some slides here, or just some pictures here of notes that I took on paper. I sketched out 4 triangles, noted which way was north, placed various details onto the site. For example, I noted these heat-absorbing elements, like the concrete patio here or the stepping stones in this site. Really, I'm just looking for any kind of materials like concrete, water, or even soil, which would effectively absorb the sun's radiation during the day and then slowly release it back to the immediately surrounding area at night. You can get really nice microclimates in really small areas and actually get away with something that were it, another 50 feet away from your house, let's say, it might have died to a frost, but because it was against your foundation, it was safe. You can also add details like how long each of these areas are in the sunlight, what time of day each of these areas pass from the sunlight. Personally, I'm just trying to keep my sketches light on the details right now, because otherwise these examples quickly become way too cluttered for your screen and for this video. But for you yourself, making your own details, your own notes, I really do suggest that you record everything you can in one place. Since you're not trying to present it to a visual audience, you're making it for yourself and you know what it all means. Just try and get as much as possible all there, so that every time you observe something about the site, you record it, and ultimately you have a long list of observations about that one site. The important thing is that you just you assess this whole picture. So approach this task in whatever way helps you accomplish this goal. Like in whatever way is the easiest way for you to record the details. That's the most important part. Whether you write it down digitally or physically, just get it recorded. All right, after heat, since we're considering the incoming radiation, we're going to look around at shade. 6 or more hours of sunlight per day is considered full sun, and this is a condition necessary for most every crop. Note the shadows cast at your site at multiple times for the day, right? Morning, noon, evening. Like this site, plot number 4, it's in shade most of the day until sometime in the afternoon. That's due to its location on the north side of this house here. Other structures and even trees can interrupt a significant portion of the sun's rays and cast shade on your plot. So at what time of day does this occur? And then also consider, are these trees deciduous or evergreen? And how does that kind of play as you plan crops for different seasons? While we're out and about, we can do a quick assessment of the perimeter and simply record details of access and security of our site. We're talking basic things like fencing, gates, anything that might affect both your movement and the use of equipment. So here for this site, it's a residential neighborhood. There's really no limit to the access anywhere around my house or my plots. But there still is restriction of movement to account for. Movement between front and back is kind of limited, and it's a long walk between site number 1 or plot number 1 and plot number 4. And those stepping stones along the edge, they're kind of along the side of the house. And I'm not really going to love using a wheelbarrow there because there's that cement lip at the edge all the time. It's going to be annoying every time I have to move. You know, that's the kind of detail that you want. That's what it's like for me. For what it's like for you would be different, but you just kind of want to think all these things out at this time. Put them onto your map. We're going to do something with all this information later. For now, we're just pressing on with our data collection. So after walking all around, we should have begun to notice the slope of our site overall and within the plots themselves. The slope or elevation of a site can affect many things, but the most significant for our purposes is that it directs how both water and cold air move. They both move down slopes and can concentrate within depressions, like a bowl or something, if there's no outlet. So you can establish your general terrain features by consulting various kinds of topographic maps, but often for these small scale things, your best bet for these precise details is to go out and assess it in person. You're looking to record if any side of the site or the plot is higher than the other side and which direction the slope is. You're looking for those depressed pockets that might be especially susceptible to frost and cold. And then you can also note any signs that you see of seasonal water flow, such as like an eroded channel or kind of like a flood or high water mark. For me, the only appreciable slope on my site is in plot number 4. It goes kind of away from the house along, the hypotenuse into the neighboring lot and also into the cul-de-sac out front. I did all this by eye, but there's a number of methods that I've linked below that are available for surveying use. Just choose what suits you. All right, we've been poking around a lot. We should also have been making note of what weeds we have seen. Start taking pictures, to start a catalog of where, even if you haven't ID'd all these weeds and you don't know what they are now, you can start building something that you can work with and look at later. Be sure to look at your neighboring sites as well, right? Because it's, especially your next closest vacant lot, because your weeds on your site aren't the only weeds you're going to deal with. They're going to come in from somewhere else. Different weeds have a lot of different methods of growth and propagation, so identifying what they are can be a long way towards easing the management of their presence. So just catalog them now. Like I said, we'll work on this later. All right, as we're looking at the weeds, we can also start taking an initial inspection of the soil. We're not going in depth yet, but do you see any trash? Is there any obvious change in appearance in the texture or color of the soil for any region? Do you see any rainbow slicks or anything that indicates like a chemical spill? Do you see any dramatic change in vegetation in a certain area that might indicate contamination or even the flooding or something? So with this soil, you really want to be careful of possible contamination events. Investigating in the safety of your site's soil is no small feat, and I do recommend that you work with your city to discover the historic use of your site. But if it is safe, if you've determined that it's safe, you can collect a soil sample now and send it to a national lab or your local land-grant university for analysis. But if you haven't made that determination yet, no worries, we can address that later. All right, last thing, water. First thing, what is the closest access for your site? At my site, I turn my attention towards the house, the source of plumbing, right? Because I'm in an urban environment. More rural, you might be looking outwards towards a stream or a well or something, but I'm looking towards the house. There's a spigot on the front of the house, there's a spigot on the back of the house, and then there's also 2 downspouts from my gutters. There's a whole edge of my roof that just drips into the lawn, but that's okay because we're kind of ignoring that side of the lawn anyway. This is also where you can kind of develop your precipitation a little bit more for your location if you haven't already. Look at things like the difference in, I get 13 inches of precipitation, but that's actually like 13 inches of water. I get 11 inches of rain and about, I can't remember what it was, I think about 4 or 6 inches of snow or something across the year. You can also look at, depending on where you are, what that rain actually means for you, because 100 inches of rain at 50 degrees northern latitude is going to be a much different scenario than 100 inches of rain at 8 degrees southern latitude. Further, the last thing that you really need to look out for, urban environment especially, are impervious surfaces. Really, any of the built environment. Impervious surfaces where they shed rainfall and it leads to an excess of water, which will either flood or drain through or something or pool up. If you're lucky, then you have a plan where you intercept it and use it later for your irrigation. But in general, any kind of roof, any kind of paved surface is going to increase the runoff for your site. While looking for paved surfaces, we can look at the broader transport routes near us. So here's my house. Here's a major local roads in town, the 3 nearest shopping centers of sorts, and also the closest schools and hospital, all places I might be able to take my produce after harvest. All right, if you made it through this lengthy video, thank you for your time, and congratulations on completing the major steps of conducting a site assessment for your potential production site. We will base our future decisions on what we find here today, so check out my supplemental video if you'd like. I'll do a little tour of this site that I've been discussing digitally. I'll do a tour of it in person to kind of show you an example of how you do it out in the real world, how to approach a site assessment. But otherwise, I will see you all for step 2.